Let's dive in. Today, we're unpacking something truly counterintuitive, pulling insights directly from some fascinating essay excerpts you've shared with us.
Yeah, we're looking at this paradoxical idea that international sanctions, measures explicitly designed to weaken and maybe isolate a country,
Right.
can actually become sort of powerful engine for technological development.
Exactly. And the focus is squarely on Iran, exploring how, despite decades of really intense external pressure, isolation since the 79 revolution,
Hmm.
it appears to have nurtured a surprising technological leap forward, especially, it seems, within its military capabilities.
And our mission here is, well, pretty simple. Extract the absolute key insights from this material. We want to understand how this seemingly backwards outcome emerged
Yeah, how did that happen?
and what its unexpected consequences are. Think of this as your concentrated shortcut to getting informed on this specific, pretty surprising angle.
And get ready for some genuinely unexpected turns. We'll explore everything from, the surprising strategic value of human capital
Hmm.
to specific moments that acted as major catalysts for innovation.
Okay.
So let's maybe set the stage with a historical observation the source material highlights. It's this idea that conflict and necessity, they have the strange track record as powerful drivers of innovation.
Yeah, that's a recurring theme, isn't it?
Mm.
Think about how radar or even the early internet emerged partly from military and wartime needs.
Right.
And history shows us a few ways that this tends to happen.
Sure.
One is just creating acute survival needs that, well, they override all the normal barriers to innovation.
Just forces your hand.
Pretty much. Another is facilitating knowledge transfer, sometimes literally by capturing enemy technology. You see this historically, like the U.S. studied and captured German V-2 rockets after WWII.
Oh, okay.
And crucially, it often involves mobilizing all available human and material resources, which can lead to really unconventional solutions and leveraging talent that might otherwise be overlooked. So the sources position Iran as a contemporary case study for this paradox.
Yeah.
Living under those heavy sanctions, that deep isolation since the revolution.
Decades of it.
Exactly. And while countries in the West typically rely on market forces, international collaboration for tech development, Iran's isolation forced this desperate drive towards self-reliance.
And unorthodox strategies.
Unorthodox strategies, particularly in defense. Compared to market-driven Western development, is a whole different ballgame.
So how did this immense pressure cooker actually translate into tangible innovation? The sources point to those historical mechanisms you mentioned playing out, like in real time in Iran.
Right. The acute survival need was, the constant pressure of sanctions, potential external threats, that was always there.
Mm-hmm.
And that third mechanism, mobilizing resources, tapping all available talent,
Yeah.
that proved absolutely critical. We'll get into that more.
Okay.
Because they couldn't just pick up the phone and buy the components or advanced systems they needed from global suppliers. That door was closed. They had to figure out how to engineer, replicate, build everything themselves,
Yeah.
often from scratch or, using unconventional methods.
And this pressure cooker, it fundamentally shifted Iran's strategic approach then.
Absolutely. With sanctions severely limiting their access to conventional military technology, things like spare parts to keep their aging Air Force flying, or maintaining their Navy.
Which must have been a huge problem.
A massive problem.
Mhm.
Trying to compete head-to-head with regional powers reliant on Western tech became increasingly impossible, just unsustainable.
So what did they do?
Well, this led to a distinct strategic pivot, starting really in the 1990s. Instead of trying to build expensive fighter jets or large warships they couldn't maintain anyway,
Right.
they made heavy investments in asymmetric warfare capabilities.
Okay, asymmetric. What does that include specifically?
We're talking missile technology, that was a big one. Maritime capabilities like marine mines, fast attack boats, and later a major focus on unmanned systems. Drones.
Drones, right.
The strategic logic was compelling, and it's laid out clearly in the sources. These technologies are relatively cheap to develop and produce compared to, say, high-end conventional platforms.
Much cheaper.
Much cheaper, but they can have a disproportionately high strategic impact, creating significant deterrence and striking power on a budget, essentially.
Now, here's where one of the most, I think, surprising and critical insights from the sources emerges. Iran's human capital base. This is an often underestimated factor, isn't it?
Absolutely. It really stands out in the material. The sources highlight that Iran has one of the highest percentages of female graduates globally in technical sciences.
That genuinely flips the script on some common perceptions of the region, I think.
It really does. According to UNESCO statistics cited in the material, Women in Iran earn roughly 60% of all university degrees.
60%? Wow.
Yeah, with a particularly high concentration in engineering and physics. This created a deep, broad pool of technical expertise within the country, despite the external isolation.
And the argument is that this pragmatic mobilization of female talent in technical fields, which contrasts, with cultural or societal barriers you might see in many other countries in the
Yeah.
region, that became a crucial strategic asset specifically because of the pressure. They needed every skilled mind they could get their hands on.
Precisely. Necessity became the mother of, well, inclusion in this technical sphere, you could say.
Interesting way to put it. Okay, so let's talk about a specific event. A pivotal moment that really showcased Iran's growing reverse engineering and technical capabilities was the RQ-170 incident, December 2011.
Ah, yes, the Beast of Kandahar incident, as they're sometimes called. This is when a highly advanced U.S. RQ-170 stealth reconnaissance drone,
Stealth, yeah, top-tier stuff.
top tier, designed to be almost invisible to radar, really the pinnacle of certain aviation technologies.
Hmm.
It was captured over Iranian territory.
Getting their hands on that wasn't just capturing a piece of hardware, right?
Right.
It was like winning a technological lottery ticket, as the source puts it.
Exactly. Iran's claim was that they took control of it via cyber warfare and brought it down relatively intact. Now, regardless of the method of capture,
Right.
the sheer fact they had access to such cutting-edge technology was hugely significant.
And the sources use this as a prime example of how that capturing enemy tech mechanism we talked about earlier played out for Iran.
Precisely. The material notes that, remarkably, within just 3 years, Iran presented their Sege drone.
The say.
Yeah, which analysts described as, well, a clear copy, a reverse-engineered version of the RQ-170.
3 years is pretty fast for something that complex.
It's incredibly fast. And this incident, the subsequent success in replication, it really became a major catalyst, leading to the mass production of a whole diverse range of unmanned systems, surveillance, attack, kamikaze drones, you name it.
And that brings us directly to the Shahed-series then, particularly the Shahed-136, which people might have heard of.
Yes, these drones became perhaps the most well-known examples of Iran's asymmetric arsenal. The sources describe them as relatively simple, cheap to produce kamikaze drones.
So not necessarily high-tech marvels in themselves.
Not necessarily in terms of, say, advanced sensors or stealth. They're designed for strategic impact rather than technical sophistication. Simple, effective, and numerous.
And the key example of their strategic use, and importantly their export, came during the conflict in Ukraine.
Right. That was a huge moment. Iran supplied hundreds of these Shahed-136 drones to Russia, which used them extensively against infrastructure, military targets. And this was a major turning point. It marked Iran's transition from primarily being a technology importer
Right, needing things from outside.
to becoming a significant exporter of military innovation, developed under sanctions, now being sold abroad.
Which, according to the sources, didn't just transfer technology to Russia, but also led to Russia beginning to produce its own localized variants. Is that right?
Yeah, the Jaren 2. A clear demonstration of the global ripple effects of Iran's domestically driven tech development, innovation spreading outwards.
Okay. Now, it's absolutely vital to acknowledge, and the sources do this too, that this hasn't been uniform success. There have been significant limitations, setbacks along the way.
Definitely. It's not like they cracked everything. Iran has attempted to develop more advanced conventional platforms,
Yeah.
like indigenous fighter jets. The Qaher-313 project is one example often cited.
The Qaher-313, right. I remember seeing images of that. Looked interesting.
It did. But Western analysts, like those at Jane's Defense or ISS mentioned in the sources, are quite skeptical about these projects.
Skeptical how?
Well, their view, broadly, is that these are often more for propaganda or maybe technology demonstration purposes. They likely lack the necessary advanced materials, the really complex avionics, or the powerful engine technology required for them to be truly operationally viable fifth-generation aircraft.
So more show than go, perhaps.
Perhaps. Or at least not yet capable of matching top-tier Western or Russian designs.
And the sources argue that these limitations, these points where Iran couldn't easily innovate or replicate, may be due to fundamental material science challenges or complex systems integration.
Right, the really hard stuff.
That actually reinforce their strategic focus, push them back towards the asymmetric.
Precisely. It pushed them even harder into the areas where they could succeed. Drones, missiles, cyber warfare. Those asymmetric capabilities that proved to be a much wiser, more achievable strategic path given their constraints rather than chasing conventional military parity they couldn't realistically reach.
Makes sense. Okay, stepping into some very recent territory covered in the material,
Uh-huh.
we look at claims made in June 2025. This was during a period of heightened tension with Israel.
Yes, reports circulating at the time, citing Iranian state media, claimed that Iran had shot down 3 Israeli F-35 stealth fighters.
3 F-35s, that would be huge news if true.
Absolutely enormous.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely crucial to note, as the sources are careful to state, that Israel denied these losses. And independent verification of the Iranian claims is, well, currently lacking. We're just reporting what the source material recounts about these specific claims, maintaining that essential impartiality.
Understood. But hypothetically,
Hypothetically, yes. The potential implication, if those claims were ever validated, would be immense. Access to even parts of a downed F-35
even wreckage.
could provide unprecedented insights into cutting-edge Western aviation technology. We're talking stealth materials, advanced sensors, complex data processing systems, things that are incredibly hard to develop from scratch.
Which could, in turn, significantly accelerate Iran's reverse engineering capabilities across multiple domains, not just aviation.
Exactly. It's a speculative point based on an unverified claim, but the potential strategic value, if it happened, is just immense.
Okay, so bringing all of this together, this technological progress Iran has achieved, despite everything, it seems to have fundamentally altered regional power dynamics.
That's the argument the sources make. Despite the sanctions regime, Iran has managed to build a military-industrial complex that's now comparable, at least in certain key asymmetric areas, to regional rivals like Turkey.
Which is quite something.
It is, and this has several important strategic implications discussed in the material. First, it challenges the assumption that technological isolation automatically leads to backwardness.
Right.
Iran's case demonstrates that focused investment in niche areas and really leveraging internal talent can overcome significant external barriers.
And it offers a potential model, maybe, of tech self-reliance for other countries facing similar isolation.
Potentially, yes. The sources even mentioned North Korea reportedly studying Iran's drone program as an example of this kind of knowledge transfer between sanctioned states.
Interesting.
Finally, and perhaps most importantly from a geopolitical standpoint, exporting military technology, particularly drones to allies and proxies like Russia. It creates a new form of technological diplomacy.
Tech diplomacy.
Yeah. This generates significant political influence and strengthens alliances in ways that don't rely on traditional economic trade. It's influence through hardware.
Looking beyond Iran specifically now, what are the broader lessons we can maybe extract from this case study based on the sources? What principles stand out?
Several key principles, I think. One is the strategic advantage of tapping into diverse talent pools, including groups that might be underutilized elsewhere, like that high percentage of women in technical fields in Iran we discussed. That's a real asset when facing severe constraints.
Absolutely. And the effectiveness of focusing on asymmetric technology.
Definitely. Finding creative solutions to strategic problems rather than just trying to compete head-on in conventional areas where you're already disadvantaged. It's about playing to your strengths or maybe developing new ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it underscores that reverse engineering, as shown by the RQ-170 incident and its aftermath, can be a remarkably effective method for technology transfer and development when traditional avenues are blocked. Ethically complex, perhaps, but effective.
Right. The sources even raise an interesting speculative possibility for the future. Potential tech collaboration between Iran and Turkey.
Yeah, that's floated in the material. Given their respective burgeoning defense industries, particularly in drones, missiles, electronic warfare, you can see the potential synergy.
But it remains speculative.
It does, for good reasons noted in the material. There's ongoing political rivalry between them, differing geopolitical interests, and of course, the constant influence of external powers like the US and Russia playing a role in the region.
Lots of complicating factors.
Exactly. But it highlights the potential for new axes of technological cooperation to emerge from unexpected places, driven by shared needs or capabilities.
So when we look at the big picture of Iran's tech development under sanctions, the sources seem to present this compelling duality. It creates both opportunities and significant risks for regional stability.
That's a good way to put it. On one hand, the rise of new, potent military capabilities could theoretically lead to a more stable balance of power, a kind of deterrence equilibrium where no single regional actor feels they have overwhelming military superiority.
Maybe. But the clear risk.
The clear risk, yeah. Particularly with the export of relatively cheap and effective technologies like the Shahed drones is the potential for a dangerous arms race
And lowering the thresholds for conflict.
and lowering the threshold for conflict across the region
Yeah,
and potentially beyond, as we saw in Ukraine. It's a complex, double-edged sword.
it really is. So circling back to where we began, the case of Iran, as detailed in these sources, it's just a powerful and frankly unexpected example of that historical paradox. How conflict and necessity, despite their inherently destructive nature, can nonetheless act as potent catalysts for innovation.
A key takeaways the sources deliver are really quite compelling. Iran's ability to innovate stems from, one, strategically leveraging its internal resources, including that surprising base of female technical graduates. Two, making smart strategic choices by focusing on asymmetric tech where they could compete. And three, proving remarkably effective at reverse engineering under extreme pressure.
It's a clear demonstration that technological isolation doesn't automatically mean technological stagnation, does it?
Not at all.
Hmm.
And that has significant implications for how we understand international relations,
Yeah.
the effectiveness, or maybe the unintended consequences, of sanctions regimes globally.
Definitely food for thought.
And the material leaves us with a really thought-provoking idea to consider, and maybe we can end on this. The challenge lies in finding ways to harness the innovative power of necessity
Okay.
without accepting the destructive consequences of war. How do you get the innovation without the conflict?
That's quite the challenge. A lot to reflect on there. Thanks for exploring these sources with us.